Séptimo Congreso Internacional CESPE 2021. Meta Universidad, Neuroeducación, Tecnologías Educativas y Pedagogías Emergentes en América Latina.
Gracias. Mi español es muy malo, lo siento. I'm going to be speaking in English. My apologies. Thank you for your very kind invitation. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the context of what's happening in Estados Unidos in the United States at this moment with respect to education and politics. I work from a position that I've called revolutionary critical pedagogy. Revolutionary critical pedagogy is distinguished from critical pedagogy because my emphasis is on the struggle for socialism. And I believe that the best educational reform we can pursue in the larger socio-political context is a struggle for socialism and a critique of capitalism. So I think that in the university, for instance, courses on capitalism, and of course the pandemic has enabled us to see, enabled everybody to see the failings of capitalism. The powerful failings of capitalism. This is a wonderful opportunity for us then to discuss alternatives to capitalism that will create a context for a much more critical, engaged pedagogy. Now, I want to just talk a little bit about the larger political context. Recent surveys have shown that 1 in 4 Americans, 1 in 4 citizens of the United States, and 1 in 5 Canadians, soy canadiense, no, mi país natal es Canadá, no? 1 in 4 Americans and 1 in 5 Canadians believe that democracy is a bad way to run the country and would prefer a strong man, i.e. a fascist, someone perhaps even like Donald Trump, to make the decisions without the interference of elections. This is a frightening prospect. What is most frightening about this new reality is almost half of millennials share this view. As Joel Westheimer reveals, democracy, it seems, is not self-blinding. We also have a powerful transformation in the Republican Party in Estados Unidos. It's replete with advocates of the QAnon conspiracy theory. Of course, it's not just one theory; it's many theories that believe, and this is a policy. Well, it's becoming Republican policy. I mean, the Republican Party has basically become the party of QAnon, the party of the big lie, the party that believes that the U.S. election was stolen from Donald Trump. And of course, there are all kinds of conspiracy theories percolating through the echo chambers of the political environment here in the United States to suggest that the Democrats are in cahoots with the deep state, and they're actually satanic cult members and satanic cult pedophile members that sacrifice children during satanic rituals. Now, this all sounds absurd, and it is absurd, but it's part of the new reality in the United States political context we have to take seriously. Now, on the educational front, a number of states, Florida in particular, Florida is perhaps the most glaring example of this. There's been a number of bills that have been passed, and these bills are designed to prevent teachers from teaching history, teaching critical history. Now, this is occurred in the past, of course, in a very small scale, but there's a controversy now that's going across the United States in which conservative Republicans, and we're talking about millions of them, are now basically arguing that teachers are to be unable, legally forced, to not teach about slavery in the United States, not to teach about the founding violence that was at the heart of the creation of this country. And so there's a concerted effort to forbid teachers. Now we're talking about university professors, we're also talking about high school teachers, to make them unable to teach critically about the founding historical events that gave birth to the United States of America. And so there's a concerted attack by governors, by politicians, by ex-President Trump against what is known as critical race theory. Now, critical race theory is a combination of critical theory, but it focuses on the relationship between capitalism and racism. And so the U.S. government, at least the conservative elements of the U.S. government, which is, you know, which is a pretty big faction, is now forcing teachers to abandon any kind of critical approach to the teaching of history or the teaching of political science in their classrooms. Now, this is a very powerful context that teachers are having to deal with. Now, this is combined with a very overt and open support of white supremacy. The Anglo-European Americans have made it very clear that they don't want immigrants coming into the country, particularly from Latin America, because this, in fact, will create what they call a demographic winter. Very serious issue to them. And they argue that the Democrats want immigrants of color to come into the country to vote Democrat. And of course, this is blatant racism. It's blatant white supremacy. Racism in the United States is escalating at an unprecedented scale. And of course, it's been escalating since the 1950s as capitalism is playing its usual role in dividing the rich from the poor. Now, in the pandemic year of 2020, higher education lost 650,000 jobs. And now the attacks on higher education are continuing, but this time they are ideological. Bills, again, are being created to ban the teaching of any divisive concepts in public schools related to race, related to sexuality, or related to gender, so that the teaching of the history of slavery is deemed to be an act of racism against white people. In other words, what the critics of critical race theory are suggesting is that the teaching of slavery or the teaching of racism in the United States is too traumatic for white students in schools. Now, can you believe that? In other words, they're saying, oh, white students are overwhelmed with feelings of guilt when they hear about slavery. They're being traumatized, so that teachers should not talk about inequality. They should not talk about racism. They should not talk about slavery, but they should focus on the greatness of the United States. They should focus on, how the United States is, the champion of freedom, the champion of justice, the champion of civil rights, etc., which is absolutely a contradiction in terms. So again, recently the Texas Senate passed Senate Bill 2202, which bans this idea. One race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. An individual, by virtue of his or her race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. Many white Texas Republicans see critical race theory as the culprit, believing that its presence in our schools will inevitably, in time, place Americans under the yoke of communist dictatorships. Now, so what they're trying to argue is the teachings of race and racism is going to lead to communism. That is a logic. It's a twisted logic. And, but it's something that teachers are now having to face, both in university contexts, in university settings, and in elementary and public school settings. Okay. The bills ban school districts from receiving private funding for opportunities like social studies, course materials, and teacher training as well. Schools won't be able to accept donations or materials for teaching about race, racism, inequality, and social justice. So this basically mandates, and I'm speaking now about Florida, this mandates that teachers have to teach and develop what is called portraits in patriotism within civic courses. That teachers must create courses that praise the United States as a beacon of freedom. State universities must teach courses on this is unbelievable, on anti-communism, and they must promote right-wing conservative ideology grounded in conservative Christian values, requiring college students to pass a civic literacy assessment exam and take a course on civic literacy in order to graduate. All college students and professors, and this is perhaps one of the most frightening aspects of all of this, requiring college students, yes, all college students and professors will be required to register their political views with the state. So we're seeing now a certain species, an American species of fascism. There have always been proto-fascist elements in U.S. politics, but we're now seeing a much more explicit American-style fascism in the United States. This sounds suspiciously like ideological tyranny to me. The governor of Florida, DeSantis, wants to penalize universities that do not celebrate his own right-wing ideology. He vows that he is attacking the evil ideologies spawned from totalitarianism. So his argument is that critical thinking, critical discourse analysis, critical pedagogy, critical race theory, is equivalent to totalitarianism. So then, what I think we need as an antidote to all of this is what I call the teaching of critical patriotism. The idea that every country, in terms of teaching history, in terms of teaching, the social studies, in terms of teaching about the foundations, the formation of the political infrastructure and the moral infrastructure, the epistemological infrastructure of the country, needs to face its own horrors. Because, as we know, many countries were founded on violence. And in the U.S., the school system has never offered a comprehensive program to reveal to students the violence that was at the founding of the United States, in terms of slavery, in terms of the genocide of indigenous peoples, for instance. And now that there is a popular theory called critical race theory out there that's precisely attempting to do this, the conservative state governments, Republican state governments, are now marshaling themselves in a way that effectively bans the teaching of critical thinking and is requiring teachers and students to register their political views publicly, and bans them from teaching courses on slavery or anything that is going to upset white students, Anglo-American students. This is quite a frightening and shocking development in the context of the U.S. So critical patriotism is an attempt to challenge this, and teachers are now mobilizing. Teachers are now creating groups to protest these measures, and there's an ideological battle that's occurring right now at this particular moment. Okay, so I basically, by talking about the importance of redesigning our schools and our school system around the concept of worker cooperatives. And this means universities, I'm referring to high schools, I'm referring to elementary schools, as worker cooperatives. And grounded in revolutionary critical pedagogy, grounded in the priority of understanding the role of the capitalism has played in educational reform and its relationship to racism and its relationship to violence. And this is a curriculum that I'm currently attempting to develop, and hopefully we'll be able to create a sufficient mass movement to contest the attack on critical thinking, to attack the attackers. I'll stop there. Are there any questions? Hasta victoria siempre.
Bye, thank you.
Felicidades, muchas gracias.
Bye bye.
Bye.